Hello, everyone. Maggie here, and welcome back to Music Therapy and Beyond. We're so happy to welcome Dr. Jim Hiller to the podcast today. Dr. Hiller is an associate professor and coordinator of undergraduate music therapy studies at the University of Dayton. Jim's scholarship addresses theories supporting music therapy practice, music therapy education and training, clinical supervision, research epistemologies, clinical improvisation, the intersections of music and emotions, and the impact of songs in therapy. Dr. Hiller was one of my music therapy professors at the University of Dayton while I obtained my undergraduate degree there. We initially bonded over our shared love for music-centered and client-centered approaches and have continued to stay in touch over the years. So today I've asked him to sit down with me and talk about his personal philosophy of music therapy, his work in behavioral health facilities, and working with people diagnosed with substance abuse disorder. So, with that, let's get started.
Hi, Dr. Hiller. It's so nice to see you.
Hey, Maggie.
I invited Dr. Hiller onto the podcast today to talk a little bit about music-centered music therapy and his work in the behavioral health setting there in Dayton, Ohio. So I guess we'll just kind of get right into it. So I sent Dr. Hiller a couple questions and had him think a lot about music therapy, his own personal philosophy of music therapy, how he takes that into his work. And I asked him to share a little bit about that with us today. So, question 1. Could you give us just a brief overview of your own personal philosophy of music therapy?
Yeah, so I had to really think about this.
It's a hard question.
It is a hard question, and I make students think through this process. Nobody ever asks me to think through this, so yeah. So I had to stop for a while and think about it and figure out where my beliefs are, and so first of all, I wear two hats. I still think of myself as a clinician, even though I'm not regularly in practice, but I do end up working with different folks through practica and so on, and supervising that. And then as an educator. So I think I bring some different thinking to both of those, but at its essence, I've embraced Bruscia's integral thinking about music therapy, and I'll talk about that because not a lot of people have a sense of what that is. So I've been writing about that in my last few articles and chapters and so on, and it's become the crux of our undergraduate program. So what that means is to be integral means to have, for music therapy, it means to have a strong sense of a variety of theoretical positions from which you make clinical decisions when you're with clients. And there are numerous positions, right? We think about psychodynamic work versus behavioral work, cognitive behavioral work, music-centered work, what you mentioned, resource-oriented theory, and these have different takes on what it means to be a person in therapy, in the client. You know, what is their role? How do we look at what their problems may be? Is somewhat dictated by the theoretical stance we take. And what music means in the process of being in therapy, and how music matters to therapy, how the therapeutic relationship matters to therapy, is all different in these different theoretical positions. So integral theory is, or integral thinking is essentially, as you understand your client's needs in the moment, you take a particular stance in order to be most helpful to them, right? So we'll talk a little bit about addictions work later on, and I can approach that from a behavioral stance, or from a cognitive stance, or from a music-centered stance, or from a humanistic stance, and I make that decision based on my understanding of the client, and how I can be of help to them, what they need from me, what they need from the music, from the experience of the music. And so it might even change in the moment. So I might walk in with a humanistic stance, and we're very open and we're working together, and perhaps I recognize, or we both recognize, that there's an immediate need. So somebody has really strong anxiety attack, if you will, and so I might immediately shift to a more behavioral or cognitive stance in order to address that need right then and there. I can't remain a compassionate humanist while that person is in a crisis, right? I need to act. And so I need to know these different theories and how they function in clinical work, and then be flexible and be able to move from one to the other. And to be integral is not to be eclectic. Eclectic is a kind of a looser way of thinking, where you might, I guess, randomness can come into that, how I make decisions and so on. Integral is, I really come from a place of understanding, of knowledge of each theoretical stance, and I choose that very intentionally.
Yeah, it's purposeful.
Right, exactly. Because clients need different things at different times, and I can't force the way I wish to practice on them. I have to flex with what they need.
Sure. Like, how do you think you balance that personally? Because I feel like that is a lot to put on yourself in the moment, to be all of these different things, and to be flexible. So I guess my question is how, because I'm thinking about how some therapists are not a good match for some clients, and I guess that comes more personality wise, or, past trauma, if there's triggers there. So I guess, how do you balance all of that in the moment? I don't know if there's really an answer for that, or if it's just kind of something that comes naturally for you.
Well, I think to be truly integral is advanced practice.
Okay.
And really comes from experience. And working with a pretty wide range of folks, and also studying, really understanding the theoretical stances, and especially how music works in those different, what's music's role in psychodynamic work, what's music's role in cognitive work, right? And that takes time. I mean, we can read about it, and you and I talked about it in class years ago, and for young therapists. So this is when, as I think about, I'm an educator as well as a clinician. How do I prepare students at a basic level of understanding a handful of different theoretical positions that they could draw upon. And then it's really from experience that if they are thinking that way in the clinical moment, that they be really reflexive, and it might be after their sessions and they say, gee, what did I do? What was useful? What was not? Where does that come from? Right? And you essentially collect experiences and categorize them for yourself so that you understand. Sometimes we don't know why we're making the decisions we're making. We make them because it seems right in the moment, but it's important to reflect afterwards and say, why was that where I felt I needed to go?
Yeah.
Right? And categorize that and put that away, and little by little we build that repertoire of thinking.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, it's a lot of experience and then also being reflexive.
Absolutely. Reflexivity is key.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I think that answers my question.
Oh,
Thank
good.
you.
Yeah.
Okay. So is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Yeah. Can I say one more thing about integral practice? So another key aspect of integral work, and what I think helps young students learn how to at least start positioning themselves differently as the client needs, is the concepts of outcome-oriented work and experience-oriented work. Right? And you and I have talked about this a lot in the past. So outcome-oriented work is when I really recognize what the client's need is. I recognize how a music experience can address that, and I act and I go with that. I have a sense of what I want to see my client or witness my client experience. That is therapeutic, that I just very clearly. So the person with anxiety, right, that I mentioned, the outcome is we want to diminish that anxiety experience through whatever, for breathing exercises or whatever.
Sure.
I know what needs to happen, and so I act. And so there's an outcome determined before the therapeutic action happens.
Right.
Right. If you think about sessions with maybe groups of kids with IDD in a classroom, for instance, more often than not, you have a plan and you have an understanding of the different needs of the kids and the different academic needs and maybe physical needs and so on. And so you do have an outcome in mind as you design your music experiences. So I know that I'm probably going to be behavioral at some point in that process, or I know that I'm just going to open the door and let everybody experience music through a music-centered stance.
Yep.
Versus then experience-oriented practice, which is, as we talk about addictions work or adult psych work or adolescent psych work even, we don't know when we walk in the door that day what the client needs. They may
or maybe even who the client is.
Yeah, right. And they may not know what they need, right? And so in experience-oriented work, we make some initial decisions about music engagement in order to bring the person into a musicking process. And from that, try to recognize what the need is in the moment. And then to go from there, right? So it's the experience of the music that brings forth understanding of the need, the goal, the objective, whatever. And then we act from there. Right? Different ways of approaching a session.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense. All right. Well, we can move on to question 2. Are you satisfied with
I'm satisfied.
question 1?
Yes.
Okay. So question 2 is me asking you to explain music-centered music therapy and that approach. And I was curious if you give a brief definition of that.
Okay. So music-centered work from the perspective of Ken Agin, who really wrote about this in a 2005 book called Music-Centered Music Therapy. Ken Agin is a Nordhoff Robbins trained therapist, is the primary researcher at the NYU Nordhoff Robbins clinic and graduate program. And so his thinking is that music in itself, music experiences in of themselves are therapeutic. That to engage someone in musicking is in itself therapeutic. The experience of being in that music is therapy. And so a client who develops in the therapy situation, develops musical skill, brings forth musicality, some deep sense of enjoying and living in music and making music, is a healthy process in itself. And by their engaging in music at deeper levels, that's the therapy. You're working musically. The client is demonstrating intelligence and emotionality and musicality and personality, and all these very healthy aspects of the person are revealed in the music. And so Ken's notion is that we don't really need goals from outside of music. That we don't, like, music isn't a means to solving some problem for the client.
Right.
Instead, it's a medium that you engage the client in, and healthy growth and health is promoted through being in the music.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, it is. It's quite honestly, at this point in time in the United States, it's hard to convince an insurance company to pay for deep musical engagement if you were to write your documentation purely around music, right?
Right.
It's so there's controversy there in terms of a practicality, and yet this is practiced all over the world, and places where socialized medicine is in place, and you don't have you're not proving to an insurance company constantly that what you're doing is meaningful and useful and observable and measurable and all those concepts. It's a viable way of working. So, but I'll also add to that, one can practice from a music-centered stance and still accomplish the sorts of observable, measurable goals in the therapy situation. What music-centeredness can do is allow the therapist to think musically. From the time the client walks in to the time they leave, it's about music. And so I'm not thinking about neural pathways of why the client is or isn't doing X, Y, or Z.
Sure.
I'm not thinking about their id, ego, or superego, or their defense mechanisms. I'm not thinking about those theoretical things. I'm thinking about music. And the more I stay in the music that way, the deeper I'm going to help the client experience music.
Yep.
Right. And again, then from the theory, it's healthy, it's health promoting to stay in the music. Yeah. It's good stuff.
It is good stuff. It's something that I think you and I both initially kind of bonded over at my time in UD, and something that I still practice and hold dear to my heart. So thank you for putting that eloquently. All right. I was also curious if you could describe some of the work that you do at Nova there in Dayton, which is a behavioral health facility.
Yeah. So this is an inpatient substance use disorder treatment center. So our students work with women's groups and men's groups. And I work with the men's groups, of course. And the work we do there is all group oriented. So our groups run anywhere from maybe 8 to 12 to 15 individuals in the session at any time, typically around 10, 8 to 10. Our practicum happens twice a week, so we see these men 2 times a week. Students plan and design sessions, and we carry them out. And I kind of guide that process, and I get involved in that process a lot as the students are learning how to work with adult groups in that environment. Yeah, so it's also a 28-day program, which is real common. So there's always, per session, there are new people coming in and people who've been there a while leaving. And so there's always a changing group dynamic as individuals move in and out of the group. That's also real common in addictions work.
Yeah. So as we previously discussed, goals and outcome-oriented music therapy in particular, it can depend on the client, of course, and like their needs, and you might not know what those needs are as you're going into the room. But are there some overarching goals that you do have at this facility that are more common that you use music to address?
Well, the overarching goal is sobriety, right?
Right.
And I don't know that we have any direct inroads in treating that. But part of what happens as someone detoxes and starts working through a program, a 28-day program, you see individuals become clearer in their thinking. They become more grounded, less internally focused, more open to ideas and the learning that can happen in that environment. A lot of cognitive work happens there in that, I call it PEP, psychoeducational processes. So there's a lot of worksheets that the staff, therapists, and so on work with the men regularly.
So I actually was working at Nova when I was at Dayton, and I was with the men's unit there with Dr. Hiller. And I think some of the overarching goals that we had were to support these people through their journey of sobriety and giving them tools and resources for when they get out of this program. So how they can use music when they get out of this program to support their journey. And then also just giving them an outlet for some of that pent up energy that they may have. And And then also, I think group cohesion too, and learning how to relate to others while using music as a medium. So I think those were some of the things that we kind of focused on, like some overarching goals that we had going in. Would you add anything to that?
No, that was beautiful. Thank you for saving me there.
That's okay.
That's absolutely correct. Yeah.
Yeah. It was a very cool practicum experience.
Yeah. And what you recognize as you articulate those different aims, that they're not aims that you can on any day plan for how the men will be open to embracing or learning from, right? And so that's the exciting part, is that you walk in the door and you're meeting these people, essentially meeting who they are that day every time, and helping them to determine what they need, and reading their emotion, reading their energies, and collectively, quite often collectively, coming to some realization of what we can do today to help you on your process.
Yeah. And that requires a lot of flexibility.
Yeah.
So the next question, I think we kind of already answered. It was, how does your philosophy and approach of music therapy influence the work that you do at this facility? And I think that you kind of answered that when I asked about your personal philosophy and integral thinking and purposeful musicking. Yes. Yeah. So would you like to add anything to that?
I don't think so. This kind of environment, and adult psych in particular, perhaps not chronic adult psych work, but where folks can move toward insight, the stance of being open and being reflexive and client-centered and music-centered makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Okay, so I also asked if you could provide just a brief example of an experience that you might use with this population. I feel like music therapy is just one of those things that is just so much easier to understand when you experience it or are engaged in some kind of, experience that you might use in this kind of setting. So for those people who went to different schools and were trained in different ways of thinking in music therapy, I'm just curious how, this more music-centered, integral thinking approach can influence your decision-making for, the experiences that you provide for this population.
Yeah. So if I think to describe a single experience is, it's a little contrived because it's a minute moment, right? Essentially,
right.
But nonetheless, so I'll try to put a meaningful context around one of the experiences that I've been involved in. So at one time in a group, the group was probably 10 or 11 people. They had we see them around 10 o'clock in the morning. They come into the music therapy session after a verbal group session, their initial group work of the day. And they came into the session pretty wound up, pretty tense. Students plan sessions regardless of knowing that we might throw the plan right out the window. And this is what happened, right? So they came in pretty wound up, and we said, so what do you need today? It's even, the lead therapist from their group let us know that things were tense and that it was a difficult morning. And so we offered, what do you think you need? What would be of help to you for your day, to get you through the day and to keep moving on your recovery process? And the overarching theme from the men was that they were wound up and they needed a way to calm down, right? Needed a way to regulate where they were and bring themselves into a more stable space and release some tension and so on. So we moved into a referential improvisation. So a referential improvisation, it means that the music that's made refers to something outside of the music itself. So it's programmatic. For those who might not know that terminology. So we did what we call a dynamic referent, and so the men chose instruments for themselves based on simply how they were drawn to the instruments that we had available. And we talked about labeling the energy that they had in that moment, and then labeling where they might move to, So they used words like, like wound up, like tense, angry, words like that had a lot of kind of just tension in it. And then we talked about, where do you want to go? Where can we move that to another energy? And so words like calm, soothing, or soothed, relaxed came to the fore. And so for a dynamic referent, the group plays the initial referent, the angry, anxious, whatever, and then over time shifts that improvisation to the idea of relaxed and calm and so on. That's the dynamic referent. And so the idea being that they can feel a change in the way their actions on instruments can slow, can become softer. The timbres they play might become softer rather than aggressive and banging. Right, and it's a challenge for the clients to take that object of the instrument that they're expressing their emotional energy on, and do something physically and cognitively that changes, and therefore, maybe not truly changing their physiology, but at least their experience of moving from one emotional state to another emotional state. Right. And so this is, to me, I do a lot of improvisational work, and so this is pretty common to work in this way. What happened that day was they very easily got into the aggressive, loud, banging, booming, crashing sounds. And then as the group played for a minute or more and tried to shift to the relaxed, calm, they could only go so far. Like what I would anticipate, which matters because I've done these kinds of experiences for myself and in groups and by myself, that I would expect the tempo to slow, the timbres to become more soothing. I'd expect these musical things to happen, that, a pulse would emerge and it would be a relaxed, flowing sort of pulse. They never quite got there. And that, for them, was really telling. Even though we gave it time and we waited for it to soothe, it never really did. And so that brought to awareness of the men that they really needed to find ways and create ways for themselves to go beyond that level, that underlying energy, to find a way through whatever means, maybe through listening to music that's much more calming and having slower tempos and so on, and gentle timbres, and right, or to be involved in making music somehow that's that way, right, to find a way to bring themselves further along that path, that because they recognized that they really needed to find that, and they couldn't find it.
Yeah.
Right. And how that's insightful, and that was important for them. And so that became then part of the rest of the session and subsequent sessions where we brought in music assisted relaxation music and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I like that you said that I guess, did you allow the group to control this dynamic, or were you somewhat pushing them in a certain direction?
No, I was involved in the musicking, but I was essentially mirroring where they were at.
Right.
I, as I recall, I did attempt to bring tempo down, but it wasn't matched. The men couldn't latch onto it and bring it down. Fascinating, right? Fascinating stuff.
Yeah. I mean, that just creates such a good talking point and such an insightful moment for those people too.
Yeah.
And also just a good use of energy from them,
right.
If they were feeling that way, to be able to release some of that in a productive way, I'm sure was helpful to an extent,
Yep. I think so.
Yeah. So I think that also answers my last question.
I think so.
Yeah.
How we thought through getting there. Yeah.
Right. So I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me this morning and talk about some of these things, rack your brain like a student, and kind of go back to basics and the foundation of your work. And yeah, I really appreciate it. It's been refreshing to have a conversation with you after so long about all this stuff.
Me too. Brings joy to my heart.
I'm glad. Me too.
Yeah.
So I also wanted to mention that Dr. Hiller and Dr. Gardstrom, which is another professor at the University of Dayton, who's also retiring soon. But she and Dr. Hiller they did write a book about improvisation and outcome-oriented and experience-oriented work. Look at that.
I just got it.
Look at that. I love the cover, too. That's a cool cover.
Yep. So this is one of a series of 4. So this is improvisational. There's also been one published already on composition methods, and we are working on recreative methods, and then there will be a receptive methods book as well. And a lot of it has to do with decision making and procedures, how to get there.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we talked about today, too. So that's a perfectly way into the book. I know I'll definitely be getting a copy of that.
You will.
All right, Dr. Hiller, well, thank you so much. Is there any final thoughts that you'd like to contribute?
I don't think so. Keep the music fresh.
Yeah, keep it going.
Yeah.
For show notes and resources in today's episode and all episodes, head to our website, musictherapyandbeyond.com. Reach out to us at musictherapyandbeyond@gmail.com and follow us on social media to stay up to date on all the content and announcements. We'll see you next time.